Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. My name is Alex Heller. I'm with Arlington Economic Development in the Biz Launch Group. And we are so excited to have you join us today for Designing for a Resilient Space in partnership with Claire Tamburro, proprietor of Tamburro Interiors. Claire has, she's been very gracious to lead this discussion because I know for a lot of businesses, particularly small businesses with storefronts and offices, that you've been looking around ever since January and your space probably looks just a little bit different than what it used to. And so the idea behind this became about how do you develop your space that protects your customers, your employees, while also being attractive and inviting, and these sorts of things. So Claire has about three decades of experience in interior design, specifically working with retail and food service industries. So she's very well-rounded in her background. And today we're going to be talking about, every type of space that you can imagine in a business function for COVID, including a home office and how to best utilize your space there. In full disclosure, I'm actually using my dining room table, so I could use a little tip there myself. But anyways, without further ado, I'm going to let Claire take it over, and we'll learn about how to design a COVID resilient space. So welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well, and thank you for being here. I'm really pleased to be part of this discussion. It's something that is really important for everyone, and especially small businesses, as you are trying to get open or put your best foot forward as you are open. I'm sure many of you are overwhelmed with all of the changes to your businesses and to your lifestyle and what that means. And hopefully this webinar will give you some advice and guidance for how to move forward gracefully. So do we want to talk about this slide a little bit, Alex, do you think, or should you want to just go right into?
We could you want to just jump right in and we can come back and review.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been having, just for the audiences, we've been having ever since Claire and I met, we've been talking design every time we speak, so.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, let me sum up a little bit what we're going to talk about too. So first, I want to talk a little bit about what it's like to work with a professional interior designer and what our education is and our experience and how to work with a designer to your best advantage. And then we'll talk a little bit about COVID and what these phase 2 guidelines mean and how you can navigate through them. And then sort of to tie it all back together, how an interior designer can help you with those guidelines and what that would mean to your business, what that actually is going to look like. So that's where we're going to end up. And then also we'll talk a little bit about some funding options because that's really a big concern, I'm sure, for most small businesses. It's all great and wonderful to say, sure, we'll make all of these improvements, but how are we going to pay for it? And so that's always a big part of the discussion when we're talking about these types of projects. So moving on, what's the difference between an interior designer and interior decorator? Interior designers are educated in interior design. I myself have a BA in interior design from a 4-year college. I went to Marymount University right here in Arlington County, and that was a fighter accredited school, which means it's a 4-year program and it goes through stringent testing to get that accreditation. And what that meant for me professionally is that there is a sequence of education and experience that you have to take. We do have to take a licensing exam similar to the CPA or bar exam for attorneys. And so you go through a 4-year accredited program and then 2 years of work experience, or the combination, the equivalent of 2 years work experience. And then you're eligible to take the NCIDQ exam, which is the National Council for Interior Design Qualification. That's a 3-day intensive exam. And once you pass it, you don't ever have to take it again, thankfully. But we do have to take continuing education in order to maintain our licensure. And that depends on what district, what locale where you're working. But it's really to our benefit and to our clients' benefit to maintain that new knowledge of products, strategies, codes, and so forth. Interior decorators don't have to go through all of those things, and so that's the major difference. Interior designers are dealing with health, safety, and welfare for their clients, and so that's health, and especially in these times with the COVID concerns. But it's also about off-gassing, if you've heard of, with sustainable design, finishes and furnishings that are more sustainable. They don't give off chemicals that could make someone sick. Welfare is the welfare of the client. It's also their financial welfare. So we're looking out for the best interests of our client. Excuse me. And we're also designing to industry standards. We're always keeping up to date on what's the latest and the greatest. And so those CEUs credits have to be reported to accrediting agency. Benefits of hiring an interior designer. So there's materials, finishes, that's fabrics, wall coverings, lighting, equipment. We're looking at those things for not only how they look, but how they will be maintained. If you have to have them insured, what you have to do to clean them, what you have to do to make sure that they stay operational, if there's any kind of servicing contracts that go along with certain equipment, all of that you have to take that into consideration for the welfare of your client. So as a designer, I don't want to recommend or specify something that's going to be a headache down the road. And so those are things that we'll talk about in our first meetings to say, how do you run your business? What is it like to be you, and what do you need in your daily operations to be smooth and headache free? And so those are built into the design. Interior designers know about lighting, energy efficiency, and so that could help your bottom line, maybe lower your energy costs, and also for lighting, not having to relamp, changing light bulbs. If you've got a large space and lots of light fixtures, and if the light bulbs that what we call lamps are going out, that's a maintenance cost, and that means somebody has to get up on a ladder, change that out, and that's another cost. So having a more efficient lighting fixture would mean less time doing that, and that keeps your space looking fresh. And so a professional interior designer will know how to best specify lighting such as that. Disabilities, that's ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. Designing for that, making sure that you have spaces that can accommodate people in wheelchairs, walkers, strollers, canes, and so forth. And then aging in place is more for residential, but if you're now working at home, that may be even more important for you as you are staying in your home longer, and then maybe people will be having clients come to their homes and having to design for people with different abilities. So there's a lot of changes going on. Interior designers know how to work with contractors. That's part of our daily life. We know how to work with general contractors, subcontractors, and most of us who have been in the business a long time, we have a Rolodex full of different ones who have different strengths and why we would use one versus another, and always have maybe an extra one in our back pocket, so to speak, so that if something happens and someone's not able to make an appointment that day, we have somebody else that can step in. So that's always really important. And interior designers are project managers. So the part of the project that we are working on with you, we will be managing all of that, managing not only the vendors that we work with, the contractors, and just making sure that whole process from start to finish is working smoothly. We make many phone calls on a daily basis with our vendors for any materials or furnishings, equipment that you are putting on the project, and have those relationships. And there's vendors that I've worked with for over 20 years, and there's a reason, because they're reliable, when I call them, they say, what do you need? When do you need it? We'll get it there for you. And so that's the benefit of working with a professional interior designer. And so when you first are working with your designer, first step is maybe you'll have a phone consultation, talk a little bit about your project, and then the next step is to have a site visit. And typically I'll take photos, maybe some measurements, walk the space. If you have floor plans, that's always helpful, although even if they're not the most current floor plans, it does help to have some indication of space and layout, and we can go from there. And sometimes it's also beneficial if you're anticipating a large renovation to have a contractor there on site too, because then we really can be talking pricing, budget, timing, all of those things right there. If not, if it's just the interior designer and you as the small business owner, we can get a lot accomplished just by me being there, excuse me. And so everything that we discussed that day, we'll put on a list, and that becomes the scope of work.
Claire, I had a question for you. It came up. When talking about kind of, let's take a restaurant. A lot of businesses, they when they're starting, they get kind of hung up in the kind of the permitting process to get open. And the county does one thing that we do is a code consultation where we kind of bring all the regulators together and the business owner, and a lot of times they'll have their contractor or their designer, and kind of work through that process, which makes it a little bit a lot faster for businesses that go that route. But when working with you, one of the things that a lot of businesses run into is that their plans aren't professionally drawn, so it's hard for the regulators to see kind of exact layout and how these kind of things work within the space and property lines and that sort of thing. Is that something, the kind of official plans of a space, is that something that you develop yourself or provide clients that you're working with, kind of
Yes,
design, layouts and plans?
Right. So interior designer definitely will do space planning, and again, that's why it's helpful to have, even if it's just even if your plan is not current, even if it just has the exterior walls shown, then with measurements and then taking that, putting that back into CAD or some other, whatever platform your designer uses for drawing, can lay out the space and at least get an approximate of what could work there. And for permitting, that should work. Really what they're looking for is ADA requirements, minimum corridor spacing, widths, 6-foot turning radiuses for radii, I guess that is, for wheelchairs, any ramps, any steps, it's really for those spaces, also for egress, to make sure that you don't have dead end corridors, that you have exit signs located in the appropriate places, that you do have enough means of egress, exiting, that you're not exiting through a kitchen for the general public, things like that. So that's what they need to see. And as long as that's represented on the plan, that should be acceptable. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah, so that's all site plan or site visit. And then second step, we'll talk about the budget. And it's always sort of a sore point with clients where they're afraid maybe to say what they're willing to spend. It's not a trick question. It really is a way for your professional to understand where you are in your budget, in your planning. And so, especially if you have a lot of work that needs to be done, maybe your initial budget won't support everything. And so then we'll have to talk about phasing. And that way, when we plan your space or your interior, we'll plan it with that ultimate end goal in mind, but we'll know that for phase one, it's only going to be this part of the design that will be installed. And then there'll maybe 2 and 3 and 4 phases of the plan. but at least we know where we're going. We have a roadmap of where we're trying to go. Because sometimes what happens when you say, well, I only have this limited budget, and you only think to that limited budget and not for bigger picture, future expansion, that type of thing, you may design yourself into a corner. And so that's where thinking bigger, more globally, more comprehensively will work to your benefit. And so knowing those budgets will help. And then as a designer, I've had to work within limited budgets, and I can get it in budget. I've had to do it many times. Things happen, especially when you open up walls, and what seems like a big budget to begin with, you get a surprise once that wall is opened up, and now you have to adjust. And I've gotten used to, over the years, again, the term having things in my back pocket just in case, because there's always surprises, and having to pivot quickly is always beneficial to everybody. So that's where a budget really does help inform those decisions. And then for your third steps, so we've talked about some of this already, what your space is now. And for COVID, it's, you know, kind of a sad day for many people, because what used to be is no longer, and now we're having to plan for something that you never thought you would have to plan for. And what do you do? How are we going to get there? How are we going to operate our business successfully, and having all of these other things that we never wanted or needed or thought we would need? And so again, that's where your interior designer can come into play. So what things are going to stay, what things go, what things are going to be added, what things have to be augmented in terms of furniture, in terms of finishes, in terms of lighting. And finishes are going to play a big role in this new COVID world because of more cleaning and disinfecting. And those are sort of two terms that you'll hear throughout, because you can clean things, but then other things have to be disinfected. And so those are two distinct things. And your finishes need to support that. Disinfecting will mean more harsh chemicals, and that could strip your finishes and make your space look really bad really quickly. And so that's where, again, your interior designer can specify something that can hold up to disinfecting and frequent cleanings that will look fresh and good, and it can withstand that high traffic and that high use. It's also going to meet all of your fire codes, and that's another really important detail to take into consideration. Maintenance, again, an operational cost. So let's take paint for an example. Paint's one of the least expensive things that you can do as a finish, but not all paint is created equal. And some paint, when you wipe it even just with a damp sponge, you'll see pigment come off on that sponge. That's because there's not a lot of binder in that paint. And so if that's an area that you're going to wipe down a couple times a day, you're going to wear that paint off, literally right off the wall, which means you're going to have to repaint. That's another cost. That's time, that's money, that's materials. So if you invest in something that's a little bit more expensive than what you thought you wanted, that will buy you more time between having to paint again. And so that's where, again, your interior designer can guide you through what's the best option for you in that particular application. Building constraints with the built environment. So a lot of you right now, if you're restaurateurs especially, maybe looking to expand into a parking lot or onto the sidewalk, and you've got limited space, the kinds of constraints that you may be dealing with, and how do you stretch that? Or also somebody who used to work in an office and now they're working at home. You've got constraints of where you can go. Maybe you're working at the dining room table right now, but maybe there's another place in your home that could be used. And we'll talk a little bit about that, of how to make space double duty. The lifespan and materials too. And so we'll talk about some of that. Some brands that I've worked with in the past have the benefit of capital expenditure funds where they renovate on a cycle, 5 years, every 5 years, every 10 years. And so they're always refreshing their space. Not everyone has that capability. And so again, your interior designer will talk to you about how often do you think you're going to renovate and what's the longevity you want to get out of this space. You know, maybe you say, my lease is only 5 years. I only need to get 5 years out of that. I may or may not renew my lease after those 5 years. So we can build to that and design to that. And that way it'll go at least that 5 years, maybe more, but then maybe after 5 years, we're going to reassess. Maybe we're going to rebrand, reconcept. And so all of that gets built into your design. And those are things that we'll talk about in these initial meetings. I'm going to talk about, and we'll come back. Okay. Floor plans, rendered elevations. So we talked about that a little bit. So yes, your interior designer can do floor plans. What we can't do, we cannot do anything structural. So if you have walls that you want to move and they're load bearing, you need an architect or a structural engineer or both. In that instance, an interior designer can move walls if they're non-load bearing. And so I can show that on a plan, and the contractor will know what to do. And so we'll do a demo plan and then show where the new walls are. And that's including even cutting a wall back, maybe just creating an opening in a wall. So we'll do floor plans, and especially if you've got different finishes on the floor, I would also do a floor finish plan. So floor plan would show walls, door openings, and then furnishings. But a floor finish plan would just show where maybe front of house finishes and back of house finishes, where those transitions are. Maybe if there's a different floor finish in a restroom or storage room, showing that, and also indicate any transition strips, what they are. And those would all be numbered and labeled. And then it would go on a finish index as well that would have your specifications that would tell the contractor what those materials are. And then for samples and things, so always provide hard physical samples to the client. We used to do a lot of formal presentation boards, not so much anymore. It costs time and money, but if that's something that you want, so maybe like a condo, multifamily space, a lot of times they would like a formal board to put up in their lobby to say that we're renovating and this is what the new finished package will look like. So we can be done. It's just not always necessary, but definitely finishes are provided so that you can see what something looks like actually in person. And actually, chair samples, that's another thing that I often do for restaurants, or even for like a desk chair for a commercial office, to make sure that it's something that you like the finish, you like how it fits, it fits the space, you know, it's the right color, it's the right size, all of those things. And to see it in person before you buy 100 of them. Okay, then construction documents. So then your interior designer can also provide construction documents. So that's the more formal floor plans that become legal documents. And something that I do and really has evolved over time is a finish index, which typically you have a finish table or a legend on your drawings. I have a separate document that I use, and it really is my way of managing a project because you have several revisions, many revisions in some cases, and sometimes the scope will change back and forth many times throughout the course of a project. And it's my way of keeping myself organized. And then when I submit it to the client, they can see, and they're looking at it with their view and perspective instead of eyes to say, no, there's a typo here, or is that what you meant? Or no, we took that out, remember? And the one project I worked on, there was only a handful of finishes for the pharmacy project last year. And the scope changed a few times because we had a change of command. What the scope started out as, it changed 2 or 3 times. And so what was in the scope originally, then it was deleted from the scope, but then they put it back in. And so we had to keep changing our drawings and all of our specifications to reflect that because the quantities changed. And so again, depending on what day it was and which revision of those documents you had, one day it was 100 yards of something and another day it was 38 yards of something. And so we want to make sure that you have all of that documented, and that's what this page is showing you. And so you're going to get your bids and your quotes from those documents, and that's why it's important to have those professionally done. And so that all brings value to your project. And so hopefully that you're trying to, getting a sense of what it's like to work with an interior designer, how we can keep you focused on your end goals, help you realize those goals, and make sure that everything's safe and in budget. It's able to be there on time, and that's something that I do on a regular basis. When I'm first meeting with a client, I ask, what's your schedule? What is your construction window? When do you want these things to be, this work to be completed? And so if we're saying, here we are in June, and you want the work completed by September, I have to find materials and furnishings that are in stock and able to be fabricated and shipped and delivered and installed in time to make that happen. So I have to look at the calendar and back up the time to see we have time to do this or we don't have time to do this. And so then I'm not going to show you something that you can't get in time for your construction window, unless for some reason I'll say there's the perfect product or solution for your project. It's not going to be here on time. Can we adjust your construction window? If not, then we have to go to a different solution. But those are things that we will discuss ahead of time so that hopefully there are no surprises like that, like, oh, now it's not in stock. It's just not acceptable. Most of the projects that I've worked on, any day that you were late, it's a fine. And so we had a lot of incentive to get those construction projects opening on time, and it's also lost revenue. And so that's always in my forefront of my mind. And then just hiring contractors. Again, I can bring people that I know to a project, or if you have your contractor that you like to work with, most interior designers are happy to work either way. And it's just a matter of, it's always best to get most of your construction team at the table earlier is always better, even if it's months away or weeks away from when that person's actually going to be on the project. To have those initial meetings, everyone sitting at the table and understanding what all of the deadlines are, what the goals are, what the challenges are, it's always really helpful because they're going to bring different perspectives that I may not have anticipated and bring up really good points. Well, what about this? Did you think about that? Do we have a loading dock? Do we have, what are the site conditions like for them to get their work done? And so we'll talk about all of those things and make sure they're all coordinated into the project. So again, that you have really smooth processes. And so during the bid process, if this project does go out to bid, so if I provide a set of documents and specification, if it goes out to bid, I'm very used to getting phone calls from potential contractors asking questions about what this finish is. And then also when it does, bid does get awarded and they're submitting their submittals, to review those and say, yes, this is acceptable or not. And so that's all part of the process. Going to inspections on site, typically I'm there on site for installations. If it's an out of town project, I'm able to manage that really well too, and have relationships with those contractors that they will send a set of photographs at the end of the day, and I can review them, we can review them together. And especially if there's a question or something that's not matching up with the drawings, a lot of times the contractor will text me a photograph and say, look at this, what do you think? What should we do about this here? This is not there's some question, and we'll work it out right then and there in real time, and we can keep the project going. And so thankfully, with all this technology, that makes it much easier for me to be in more places at once and troubleshoot any of those issues. And then for follow-up, once everything's completed, maybe take one more walkthrough with the client and just make sure that we've addressed everything. There's no other loose ends or outstanding issues, and give it a clean bill of health and move on. And so we talked about this a little bit of your finishes and how to select those things for initial costs, life cycle costs. Something that we didn't talk about a little bit is the relationship of your back of house areas and your front of house areas. Something that as your interior designer, I would want to know is, what's it like for your staff to be in the space? What's it like for your customers or your guests to be in this space? And so I want to know the whole process of what it's like when I walk in your front door and what that experience is. How are people cycling through your space? How are you getting the food out to the customer? How are you getting people seated? How are you, what's the amount of dwell time, wait time that someone can expect? And all of those things are incorporated into the design. If you've ever heard the term form follows function, that means that we'll talk about how your space needs to function first, and then we'll make the design fit that. That way, every piece of furniture, every piece of equipment, all your flooring, all your finishes work towards how the space needs to function. And so knowing that up front will then make your space that much more pleasant to be in for your staff and for your guests, because it's seamless. And so talking about those goals, your lighting, same thing, how to make that lighting match up with your furniture plan, and so that there's light where it needs to be. And is it flexible? Do you have different scenes for different activities? And also lighting, again, we talked about that a little bit with sustainability and energy efficiency and touch points for disinfecting. So there's using touchless, can't think of the name, the sensors for occupancy sensors for when people come into a room, especially for maybe your restrooms, maybe for your storage spaces, that can help save you money. And then that's also not having those light switches that are touched constantly. That's one less place that you need to worry about disinfecting. And we talked about FF&E, that's an industry term, fixtures, furniture, and equipment, their performance and those maintenance expectations. So we'll talk about all of those throughout the discussions. And now getting into, what does the state of Virginia want for phase 2? What are the guidelines? And so these are all the spaces that are mentioned in those guidelines. And so if you're having social gatherings, your restaurant, food and beverage spaces, farmers markets, brick and mortar retail, fitness and exercise facilities, swimming pools, which we're coming into pool season, or actually we're in pool season, and as far as I know, most pools are not open. Recreational sports, personal care, and personal grooming. So all of us have not had our hair done in a long time, or just getting it done for the first time in many months. Campgrounds and overnight summer camps, entertainment and public amusement, outdoor performing arts, outdoor concert venues, which again, people are wanting to get out there, and movie theaters and going to baseball games, and then football season, the not the playoffs. I'm not a sports person, so I'm the worst person to say about that. But when they're doing their practicing, some people like to go watch them practice. All the museums, botanical gardens, aquariums, zoos, all of that, social clubs, even like walking or motorized group tours, and definitely religious services. It's all been a big challenge. And so the guidelines address all of these types of activities and they're pretty comprehensive. I've read through them, but there's some commonalities with them, and it's all pretty standard. Basic rule of thumb for most instances is the 6-foot distancing, and that's pretty much standard for almost any instance. The one difference is for sports. If you are having a yoga class or a ballet class or classes like that where you're indoors, you need to have 10-foot distancing. And so that's really a challenge if you're having indoors. And so there's a lot of people that are talking about having those yoga classes or Pilates classes out in a park or some other outdoor space where they can spread everybody out and you have the fresh air. The occupancy is getting limited too. So most spaces are limited to 50% occupancy. And general rule of thumb is no more than 50 people in one space, regardless of what the type of space is. And but as you go through the different types of spaces, there may be something more specific for that. For commercial office spaces, they're encouraging teleworking, and most of us have been doing that for these months. And one nice thing is it proves that it can be done. I think many businesses have been pleasantly surprised that people can work from home and successfully complete their work, even though they're not in an office. And I think we've all pivoted that way. The challenge, though, may be internet access, maybe security for those internet systems, and also a dedicated place to work. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're talking about temporarily moving or staggering workstations. What's ironic about these days is that prior to the recession in 2008, we typically had work cubicles and workstations that were what we call the cubicle farms, acres and acres and acres of them in some of the bigger offices. And then when the recession hit, the rents were really high and people wanted to save a little money. And so they went to smaller spaces and they limited the amount of space per each of their employees to a smaller footprint. And they made these open office plans where you had more interaction between people and these kind of shared public spaces where they could have impromptu meetings and everything, basically the walls all came down and everything was open, and maybe just their upper management had private offices, but maybe with glass partitions instead of gypsum board and solids. And so now here we are in COVID, and we're having to kind of pivot back to a little bit of the old way, which again is sort of ironic, but it can be done. And so it is being done. And I'll show you in some of the next slides of how that can be done successfully, even using the furnishings that you have. And so again, limiting the in-person work-related gatherings. But again, there's furniture that supports all of this. And the good news is there's so much product out on the market right now that's been in the market. It's not even that it's that new. It's always been there, but now more people are going to have to take advantage of it. But there's lots of it out there. The factories are open. The stock is good, and they're all ready to go. So that's the good news. Just trying to keep meetings short if they do have to be in person. And right now we're lucky that we're in the summer months that we can have outdoor meetings, maybe at an outdoor cafe on a bench somewhere, and kind of keep that fresh air as a benefit. One of the things to communicate to your clients, to your guests, to your customers will be effective signage for how to direct people now to cycle through your space. And so again, as the designer, we're going to talk about how people cycle through. So now we have to add in this extra layer of where do I go? How do I proceed through your space with social distancing? And so State of Virginia has some standard signage that's already out that can be used for your business. and telling people what to expect. This one here can be modified for this specific restaurant. Put your name and maybe logo on there so they can be tailored for you. This one is if you have tables that you can't move and you want to indicate that you don't want people to sit there. This one says it's reserved for no one, which is sort of a sad thing, but you can put that on the table and just indicate to people, please don't sit here, we're trying to space everybody out. These are, so where these were provided by the state of Virginia, these can be bought. These are just from Staples. But there's lots of things like this out on the market so that you can put these around that indicate to your customers, to your clientele, to your guests that you know, we're mindful, we're being safe. This is a clean space. These are the things that we're doing. These are directional signs. This is indicating where you want people to be 6 feet apart. And so again, as your designer, I would help integrate these into your space successfully so that they're in places where people would see them. And some of these too, there are decals that can be attached that aren't going to harm your finishes. So we could have some of these things printed on materials that will adhere to a surface, but if you need or want to remove them for whatever reason, or hopefully when we get the all clear and we no longer have to do these things, you could take that off and there's not going to be any residue or damage to that finish. So again, those are things that we could discuss for how to integrate those into your design. This is a project that I worked on last year, and as you can see, there's a lot of seating. This had 104 seats, fine dining, and that was just in their dining areas. This is their main dining room, and this is their private dining room. And what I didn't show is their bar area, and that was like a whole nother thing. But you enter from the parking lot here, and you have a vestibule. There's a hostess stand. So generally, as people come in, you would be greeted by somebody, and then you're seated at one of these tables. And so what's challenging about this particular restaurant, and this is why I wanted to use this one as an example, they have mostly in their dining area a lot of booth seating that we can't move. And so how do we social distance with that in mind? There's only some tables, these 4 tops, this 1 2 top, that are actually movable. And actually the conditions now, these are all 2 tops. There's no banquette here. So these could all be moved. And then in the private dining room, these can be moved, and the booths are actually separated now. What's also nice about this restaurant is they have glass panels that slide. They can open this whole space up if you had a big event and you wanted all one open area. These slide back into a closet here, and so you could have one big open space. And there's also a projection screen here too. If you wanted to have a meeting in this space, the projector is up in the ceiling, and so if you had a meeting or you wanted to watch a sporting event or some other activity on the screen, you could rent this space out for that. And so I took this plan and then revised it for social distancing. And so here's a little bit what that could look like. So took out, there were 40 seats in this originally, now we're down to 30. And so they're spread out pretty well, and I think that's successful. What we had to do here is I put in some panels. It's not ideal. It may not be that comfortable, but it can be done. So especially for here, putting some panels in between, that would give some protection for people that are sitting next to each other. Probably in an ideal world, you would do seat people at this table, seat people at this table, and not seat people at this table unless you absolutely had to. Same thing, maybe seat people here, seat people here, and not at that middle table. But those partitions, again, give a little bit added protection in between the different tables. And one thing that is being recommended, even for quick casual, for when you're operating indoor restaurants is to take reservations. That seems to be something that will help manage the flow of people, and that is one of the concerns with these guidelines. And even if it's not a restaurant, even if it's for classes, so like exercise classes, rather than accepting just walk-ins or drop-ins. Same thing with getting your hair cut, making sure somebody has an appointment so that you can manage the flow of people in your space and not be having people waiting and congregating, which is another thing. They don't want people bunching up together too much. So here's what some of these panels could look like. I think this is, it looks nice. I'm not sure how successful this would be actually in reality, because if you look at this, this is kind of a tight space on a good day, and then you've added this partition, and I'm thinking that these are probably on casters. So how do you train your staff, and is your staff adept at accommodating people in this manner? Are they used to seating people this way? You may have to have your staff trained to pull this panel out, maybe move this table aside, get them seated in these back areas, which are harder to get to, put the table back and make sure everyone's comfortable. So there's a lot, you know, more systems that have to be in place, more training that has to be in place for how you manage these things. I put these in here because I think that plants might be as much of a successful barrier as panels. Plants, if you're able to maintain them, again, that's another task, someone else's job, that makes sure that they're watered and that the dry leaves are pruned or any flowers and things are trimmed. But for indoors especially, they help purify the air. And so that's another added bonus. It gives you some barriers in between tables. If you're spreading your tables out like you are here, and you've got all these great big holes, if you fill that up with plants, it won't look so barren and so sterile and so stark and so out of place, that those plants could help make your space look more inviting and more friendly. These are some other strategies. I know a lot of people, for restaurants, are going to outdoor spaces. This is a way to sort of create some outdoor space. This could even be used inside. This is an all-in-one piece. It's powder-coated metal. Same thing, so you could create some space within an outdoor space that could be comfortable and inviting. And these are either glass or plexiglass partitions, sneeze guards. You're seeing that a lot more at even in retail applications, at the post office, anywhere where you're facing somebody behind a counter, having that shield in front of them to protect. And so again, how do you integrate these in a way that doesn't look odd or out of place, that it looks like it was intentional and part of the design? So going to commercial office, like we were just talking about, here's that open office plan where really everyone was out in the open, could talk to each other. One of the criticisms of this type of plan is that it was noisy. You didn't have any acoustical privacy. And so there are things that could be done even if this type of setup were to remain in place. There's a lot of really cool, fun, pretty acoustical materials that look like art. They can be integrated into light fixtures so that you could have all kinds of mobiles hanging over here, but they're actually not just these pretty objects. They're absorbing sound and helping to keep this less noisy. These types of partitions can be added to those same desks, so they're really just putting them in between people. So now they've got some visual privacy and then some protection, again, from spreading. This panel here makes me a little nervous. If that's not bolted to the ground, that could get knocked into and that could be a hazard, but it looks good for here. And so how to make sure that that's done well would have to be planned. Same thing, here's another option, having more like carrels, like what we used to have in libraries. So now you're really just going back to almost like a full-blown cubicle system. And then with the colors and things, that makes it a little bit more fun, maybe a little bit more attractive. But really, these are just attached to the existing desks. So in theory, you could take these off if you ever wanted to again and go back to this. So you really haven't lost anything. You've just added these extra partitions here. And same thing, more partitions here and here. And so they really do help with part of the design. They become functional where you can have these tackable wall surfaces. You can put up your reminders, your calendars, your memos, maybe even have file folders hanging from these things. And so they become functional in many different ways. Home office. So one of the ways to stretch some space in your home office is maybe to use a closet. And hopefully if you do have a double closet, a double width closet, you could turn that into some office space. So like, for instance, this is what's probably a guest room, and they put some wall covering in here just to make it a little bit more attractive, but really it's just simple, maybe painted plywood shelving that's making your work surface, and you put a some kind of storage unit right underneath that. That chair is whatever chair that you might have. But when this space is not in use, you can close the doors back up and it goes away, and now you can still use your guest room. So that's a really good way to stretch some space and get double duty out of it. This one looks like you just took the closet doors off and slid some furniture inside. And so that's probably, again, you may even have a desk that's already usable that you can just slide that back in. Same thing here. This is showing how you can use these doors as an additional work surface for file folders and other display items, and just getting as much use out of all of those surfaces as possible. And this is probably the most expensive one because it's actually having built-in millwork. So taking the doors off, putting some nice crown molding on here and building out millwork, that's a more permanent solution. Same thing on this one. This is just adding shelving and taking the doors off. This looks like it's actually a piece of furniture that has doors that would slide so that you can cover this space up when it's not in use and then slide it back open. There it is. And so if you don't want to see your desk on a day-to-day basis, you can just cover it up and just move the chair aside. And same thing with this one, just putting in a shelf and adding storage. So pretty simple. So that's, I think, a good way to get you out of the dining room table. So how are we going to pay for all of this? Burke and Herbert, which happens to be the bank where I have my business, has some business lines of credit for you that they have secured and unsecured loans, lines of credit. There's different pricing. They're really great to work with, and they have lots of options for you, and they're very hands-on. And they're a smaller bank, but they have people that are willing to work with you. And same thing with loans. They have loans, and so there's lots of products out there that are available that could help you get over some of these hurdles and help you get some funding for these projects to help you get your business back open. And then just talking a little bit about me. We good?
Yeah, thank you so much, Claire. This was a lot of really great information. And I really liked how in designing for COVID, you can really make the space beautiful, and inviting, but also safe. Using these little design tricks like planners and things that you mentioned. So, one question I had, and it was about really, this disinfecting kind of situation. Deep cleaning. Businesses are doing a lot of cleaning right now. When you mentioned paint type, what if someone is wanting to repaint their space to make it more durable? What kind of brands? What with regarding paint? What should someone look out for when selecting a paint? Is there a specific number or?
There's 3 or 4 that I've used most often throughout my career. Benjamin Moore is one of them, and Sherwin-Williams is another, and then Scuffmaster, which is maybe one that's less well known.
Mhm.
And all of them have different varieties. And so there's reasons why you would choose one type versus another. They really do have products that can meet different price points and different capabilities. Sherwin-Williams has a lot of coatings for different applications, not just for walls. Sherwin-Williams also has coatings for floors, for like epoxy floors for your back of house kitchen areas, or storage,
Oh, okay.
or anywhere that you need to be have a non-slip surface, but it doesn't want to be decorative necessarily. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be functional. And so you would use these coatings that are sprayed, applied, or rolled and troweled on, and they're non-slip. So even so, like for a commercial kitchen where you have a lot of oil that gets up in the air and spilled and so forth, it's a non-stick or a non-slip application for that. And so it really depends a little bit on what you're trying to do, but those brands have things to meet whatever performance that you're trying to get to. And so what you want to look for,
Okay.
though, kind of the ratio of pigment to finish. And if you think about paint this way, anything with a high sheen, that means that the finish is on the outside. Can you see me?
No, I don't think your camera's on, but
Okay, that's
I could change
I'm
that for you.
talking with my hands. I know I'm confused. Okay, so when you have a high sheen, the finish is on the outside. So I've got finish here. When it's more of a matte finish, the pigment is on the outside, and so the pigment um, is more fragile in that case. And so now you can see me, I think.
Yep.
And so those are things that we would talk about. Okay, where is this going? What's the application? Generally, any place that's going to be more wiped down more often, you want a semi-gloss. So door trim, doors, even walls, like especially in restrooms, if it's painted, I would do a semi-gloss. It's more shiny, but you can wipe it down. And if it's a good quality paint, when you wipe it down, you're not going to get pigment on the sponge. And so that's how you know that's a good quality paint. But again, there's different specifications. And so we'll talk about what you're trying to do, where it's going, and what the life cycle is, and all of those things. And then colors, because some of the darker colors, it's gotten better over the years, especially with the low VOC paints. They're water-based. It used to be that some colors didn't look as good, or just weren't easily achievable in certain colors. Paints have really come a long way, and they're one of the first products for sustainability that has successfully navigated all of those challenges. And I would say the carpet industry is another one that has really been able to recycle their products really well, and you can recycle those products almost infinitely. Same thing with some fabrics. It's pretty amazing, and that they don't feel like they're plastic. They feel soft to the hand. They're beautiful. They won't fade. You can clean them, and they look great for a long time.
Yeah, and folks, feel free to, I see we still have a quorum on this webinar, so feel free to submit your questions through the question box. I forgot to mention that earlier. In thinking about your space, and I'm kind of reminded of like certain restaurants and groups. Is there anything that you would recommend taking out that may have been in your space before COVID? The example that I kind of come to mind for this is like many restaurants and bars and lounges may have like pillows and these types of
Yeah.
kind of accessories
Yes.
within the space. What are your
Yes.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yes, I was definitely thinking about that, that maybe less is more. That's something that we could talk about. So I'm there to do a site visit to take out some of the things that make your space look cluttered and maybe not as clean, especially if you're having to take furniture and stagger it around. And now it doesn't make sense, you know, whatever accessories you had, they're not in the same places where your furniture was and they look odd. So rearranging some of that so that your new space plan fits with your accessories and so forth. Everything's working together to make a cohesive design. Yeah, I would definitely take some things out. Maybe maybe you even want to add, again, and we talked a little bit about these temporary graphics. Can you see my screen as well?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, so this is a graphic here, and that's just a photograph. Actually, that's a photograph I actually took. This was a vignette that I designed for a trade show. But you could take a photograph and enlarge it and apply it to the wall, and it could be anything. It could be artwork, it could be something that's part of your brand, it could be brand messaging, it could be signage, but they make these graphics, the materials that they're printed on is a type of wall covering. Sometimes they're sticky back, but there are ones that are removable. And so some of them are removable and you could apply it again, or sometimes it's once you take it off the wall, it's just a one use. But that could be a way to maybe take down some existing artwork and put up something that is new to get your space looking fresh. And it doesn't have to be permanent. So you could take that off the wall and it's not going to hurt that finish that's underneath there. So the things that I think might help keep everybody looking new and inviting.
Yeah, because that's one of the things. I mean, for a lot of businesses, you know, reduced occupancy, you know, kind of can make their space look, you know, empty.
Right.
You know, and even if there are tables and people in there, it could still look empty compared to what it would have before.
Right.
Everything.
One of the things I've heard of, and I don't remember where this was, but somebody mentioned that they didn't, one of the restaurants did not take away tables. They left all of their tables in place. But in order to achieve the social distancing, they put mannequins in the chairs where they did not want people to sit. That way it still looked like it was full, but you had a mannequin sitting next to you instead of a person. And so that's sort of just a fun way. And that's a good thing too. I think one thing to try to remember for all of us is let's try to have a little bit of fun and put some fun as much as possible back into these designs, especially for food service, where people are nervous, people are shy about coming out to being in public, and to try to coax people out. How can you make your space more inviting? Same thing with going to exercise, going to get your hair cut, any of these places, even just being in an office. How can you make your spaces inviting? And adding a little bit of fun to this, I think, could take the edge off and would go a long way. And so that's something I have a sense of humor and love putting that back into the design. So there's ways we can do that. I was even thinking, so these plants, again, for filling up sort of those empty corners would help. Maybe you could even put large bouquets or large plants on the tables that you didn't want people to sit. And so that gives, again, some spacing. It gives also some privacy. And another thing I think about the social distancing and having people spread out, now you do have more privacy because people are not sitting so close to you. In some ways, that might be a nice thing. And so maybe for special occasions, maybe you want to invite customers and to say that we have all of these really lovely tables where you can have a nice dinner and privacy and a lot of attention of our wait staff. And so turning these kind of negative scenarios into positives, and how can you market that to your benefit, and kind of just recreating your services and how you can be that kind of bright spot in somebody's day. and you know, because
Yeah,
everyone.
because I know a lot of businesses have been, kind of, at least I've seen on social media with some of the local businesses that we work with, they've been kind of showcasing, last week or 2 weeks ago, I can't remember timing anymore, but when we
I
interfaced
know.
a lot of, like, what is it? I don't even know what day it is. Um, when we entered phase two, a lot of businesses were showcasing their space on social media, to kind of communicate to their customers that, we're open, it's going to
Right,
look different, but here's what we've done,
right,
and so, that design process is
right.
part of that as well.
And I think this is kind of a really nice opportunity. So again, turning this into a positive, there's a lot of good things that are coming out of this. I think a lot of innovation, a lot of people had time to think about life and where we are and where we're going and what that looks like. I think this is an opportunity to sort of recreate ourselves. What do we want to be for the future? And so part of, I think, planning for all of this, I'd like to see kind of a twofold thing. What do we need to do for this immediate time? Okay, we need to get open. What does that look like? But also having that discussion, okay, so now once we're open, is this what we want to be? Is this who we want to be? Is this who we want to look like? Is this how we want to function for the foreseeable future? Is this temporary? And then what are we going to do for the next 6 months, 12 months? What does that look like down the road? And so I think having that as part of the thought process, and some of it I know is wait and see because we don't know what's going to happen. And I get that, but just trying to get ahead of it and to plan for that future. Maybe some of these changes and modifications, renovations, revisions, maybe they are temporary, but maybe you just say, you know what, I think this is how we want to operate for forever now. This is going to be our new way of doing business and planning that way. And so kind of going back to the floor plan for the Greek restaurant. So these booths and things, what other ways, there's other things that you could do, and some really lovely ways that I've seen with some of the restaurants, creating spaces with draperies and some of these panels and things. You really could make it look quite beautiful and magical for someone, even though the reason, the motivating reason for doing that was this COVID, but maybe it makes you create something that you never would have thought of. And so that's, I think, kind of the bonus of this. And if we can get to that place, then I think you're really going to see some successful businesses because you've created spaces where people want to be there. It's not, we have to do this and it looks really clunky and functional and scary and sterile. That's the opposite of what hospitality is. We want to create spaces that are inviting and warm, and people want to go back there often because it's taking them out of their ordinary day. And so if we can get to that place, then we really have been successful and done our jobs.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Well, we're at our time. Claire, I really want to thank you for partnering with us on this. I found it very informative, and I think it's a very important subject as we get back to kind of what is this new normal. So thank you for joining us. Those on the phone, thank you for joining as well. And at BizLaunch, we don't go away. We're still here. We just released a new marketing toolkit that's available on our website that you are welcome to utilize as an Arlington business or any business in the region. And we're here. The best way, our website is bizlaunch.org, but if we can be a resource, please don't hesitate to reach out to us as well. So we really want to make sure businesses are successful in this new normal. So again, thank you so much, Claire. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really been a pleasure to offer this to everyone in Arlington County, and I thank you and Arlington County for this opportunity. I've always had my business here, and Arlington County really is a huge supporter of small businesses, and it's one of the reasons why I made the effort to stay in Arlington County, because you are so supportive and you do offer so many wonderful resources for small businesses. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, have a wonderful week, everybody. And we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.